Greetings, Mark Rang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun, and my guest today is Chris Lewey of Raven Interpretive Programs or whatever, but it's Chris is all out, Mr. Outdoors, and appropriately enough, we had a nice snowstorm yesterday, so we're going to talk about
fits right in
how winter works around here. Go ahead. So let's start, give us an overview.
You know, we're so lucky to have the perspectives that we have here in New England. It changes all the time, as we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
You know, we can talk about 4 seasons. You really talk about 8 seasons. You really make it 16 if you want. I mean, it's just a constant change. And winter is obviously challenging for all life here. I mean, it really...
Including humans.
Including, yeah. We usually include humans in life, although it doesn't seem that way sometimes. But yeah, it pushes the limits, doesn't it? I mean, the extremes that we deal with. And, you know, we somewhat live in a tropical environment right here. I mean, we're in our shirt sleeves. It's comfortable. Yeah. Because we've been able to manipulate the environment. And you walk out the door and it's another world. And to look at those extremes that wildlife and plants deal with, I think it's another great window into understanding the world a little bit better.
Well, one of the things you've said before, and I find fascinating, is that winter around here is like the desert. It's dry. I mean, it's not dry because it's winter. I mean, but things are frozen. Yep. So for plants to have access to the water, it's like a desert.
Right. We don't normally think of New England. You look outside now, and there's tremendous amount of moisture, but it's all locked up in snow and ice. It's unavailable as liquid for the most part, and you can see in places. I drive along the old Saco regularly. You can see in places that it's not frozen over, and those places are being exploited by some of our ducks. Look at there, we've got common goldeneye out along Harbor Road, along the old course of the Saco. Mm-hmm. Canada geese are there. They need that type of
and they winter over?
They winter over as long as they have some open water.
Now the Canada geese, there's a little digression here, but I mean, aren't there two, I don't know if they're species, but 2 varieties of Canada geese? One migrates and one doesn't.
Yeah, there are some populations within the overall population that are sedentary, and that's true with a lot of species.
Is that the same species, or are they just
same species? It could be included as a subspecies, and sometimes it's not. It's just part of the population that shifts. There are several species. Some of our raptors have what's referred to as a differential migration, where a portion of the population will migrate. If they all stayed here, not enough resources. And it's often, I find interesting to see people that have done research to see, well, how do they determine that? I know Bernd Heinrich, a professor from UVM, did a lot of work on ravens in winter and looked at how they made decisions on things. And he thought that the communal roosts at night, they exchanged information about populations, about food sources. And that's just I find that just so interesting that another species gets together, down at the watering hole or at the inn at night, and somehow that it might be through, some type of vocalization. It might just be through the ones that come back to the roost with a full crop. Hey, Ralph got a meal today. Yeah. Let's see where he's going in the morning.
Or maybe there was one goose at some point that was a little lazy and just said, heck with it, I'm not going south. A couple other, but I always think of that communication is like when, and there's that whole book, and you probably know the name of it, I forget, about how trees communicate.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Root to root.
Right,
if one is distressed, another tree will react a certain way.
Right.
I mean, it's fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. That's the word for it. And I think it takes us off our pedestal a little bit that, boy, it's pretty darn sophisticated things other than us. We think of ourselves as somewhat sophisticated. Yeah. And it's kind of fun to see, well, there's some...
Boy, speaking of raptors, and I had it on my phone, I should have thought of it, I would have put it up. But a couple of weeks ago, I guess my question is, do hawks are they just opportunistic in terms of rodents and birds? And the reason I ask that is I have a bird feeder outside
Yeah.
my picture window, and a couple of weeks ago, boom!
Yeah.
A raptor, two birds hit it. The bird that the hawk was chasing, and the hawk knocked himself out.
Oh, really?
So he was, splayed out on the ground.
Wow.
I took him in the house, and his eyes, you could tell he was out of it.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether he had a broken wing, and all of a sudden his eyes got, where am I?
Yeah.
So I went out, he took off.
Right.
Right. Not injured.
Right.
But so are they opportunistic that way with birds and mammals?
Depends on the species. The birds that are coming into your feeders right now, probably the accipiters, which would be sharp-shinned hawks, relatively small, blue jay size, a little bit larger with the females, and Cooper's hawk.
This was a Cooper.
It was a Cooper's hawk.
Yeah,
and that's a mid-size accipiter. The bigger accipiter is the goshawk, now named American goshawk. That's a big named derivative, goshawk derivative of goosehawk. So you can imagine they could feed on, a bird the size of a goose.
Do you think we're going to change the Canada geese to America geese? I mean, if we can change the Gulf of Mexico. Why?
I know. I wouldn't be surprised. If something's probably in the works.
So we have some photos, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Rob, let's. And Chris, you can talk over them.
Yeah. Winter is exciting, though. I mean, you can see these changes. So this is a gray squirrel foot.
Foot?
Foot. And I put this took this picture from a roadkill years ago. And they developed these extra heavy guard hairs. And a lot of mammals do this. Yeah. And the white actually is warmer than any other color that they get. There's most of the hair that we're not good examples to use, but most of dark hair is the hollow central shaft is filled with a pigment. It's not as warm as a hollow shaft that's filled only with air. So that's why many of our mammals will put on a winter coat of guard hairs. Our moose do it, and the great example. This is a moose that you can see in the shoulder, or just a little bit of guard hair there. It's often really noticeable in the spring when they're getting rid of that. Yeah. I had a moose walk through my yard just the other day, and I just don't see them as much as we all know we used to.
It's the tick situation.
Yeah. Right. That's the main cause
now,
of it.
Speaking of that,
you can see. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can see on the legs of this one the guard hairs. The legs are lighter, and they have an issue with their long legs. They break one of the ecological rules. I don't know if we've talked about some of the
backwards
some of the
legs.
rules.
No.
Just as far as there's a rule in it. There are rules in any science. Rules are just tendencies, and one of my favorite rules is Allen's rule. This ecologist came up with the observation more than anything else, and it's somewhat obvious that as animals in a particular group, family or species, get to more northern extremes, they seem to have shorter appendages. Okay. The Arctic hare, compared to our snowshoe hare, the Arctic hares have shorter ears, and the snowshoe hares have a little bit. Desert hare has
Big
a really
ears.
long ear.
Right.
They get rid of a lot of heat that way. So this is the Arctic hare. This isn't one of my pictures, but it's a good example of Allen's rule, how the extremities are shorter.
It does look like he's got short ears.
Yeah, they're really, really short. And compared to these guys that are longer. And this is a snowshoe hare. He's got a little dab of white. This was taken up at Lake Umbagog in August years ago. But that white will spread. This is August. It'll spread, so he'll be totally white. Mm-hmm. Again, those warmer hairs keeping him warm. Not just the camouflage being an advantage, but it's a warmer coat for them.
Speaking of rabbits, so we have like the regular they look like bunny rabbits, but then we have hares, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the eastern hare, is that what it is?
We have snowshoe hares, and then the rabbits that we have New England cottontail, and we
yes.
have eastern cottontail.
Okay, because I see eastern cottontail around my house.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
You do.
and then they're kind of rare these days, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't see them very often. I don't see them very often at all.
But they're interesting looking because they have the big hind legs. I mean, they're
yeah.
I mean, they're like a real hare,
Yeah.
not just a cottontail.
Right. They're in the same family, but hares are different than rabbits. Rabbits have altricial young. They come out needing a lot of parental care. They don't have any fur on them, and the hares seem to be adapted more for extreme climates, and their young have hair on them. They can take care of themselves. They're precocial. They can take care of themselves a little bit better than the rabbits. The rabbits can.
Just talking about another digression about ticks, and I think everybody knows that the ticks have decimated the moose population. And we used to have like 8,000 or 9,000. I think this is kind of right. 8,000 or 9,000 moose in the state, and there's only like 4 or 5 now.
Yeah.
And Maine has like 80,000 moose.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of Maine, okay, it's Maine, it's big, but
yeah.
that's like 10 times as many
Right.
moose. But my question about the ticks, it reminded me, is that possums eat ticks.
Yeah.
And I have a possum around my house this
You do,
winter.
yeah.
I see him
Yeah.
wandering around my bird
They
feeder.
just they look cold, don't they?
I know, and
they
they're
look like they just can't keep themselves
But
warm.
obviously that's not, they must be moving up as the
Yes,
temperature
yeah.
warms up. I've
See
never
'em-
heard of it not.
See them more and more around here, and I see roadkills.
Really?
I wouldn't
But
say
can they
it's fairly
survive?
regular.
Obviously they
Yeah, they can. They can. I've seen them out wandering through the snow on my road. I don't
could they
know
be
how successful they are at
Right.
surviving, because it's hard to. I don't know a whole lot about possums. I haven't had much of a possum relationship in
been
this
hiding.
neck of the woods.
But they could if we have enough possum, maybe that'll be the balance for the
It
ticks.
might be. It might be. That's where it's great to look into the way things work and how things will mesh together.
All right, so what else do we have, Rob?
Well, let me just mention
Okay,
about
yeah.
the moose's legs.
Okay.
So they break Allen's rule.
Oh yeah, the long legs.
The long legs break Allen's rule. Mooses in the deer family, and they've got the longest legs of any deer, and they're also designed for northern living. So
Why do they have? Okay, why?
Yeah, so it's advantageous, of course, for them to have long legs. They can get through the snow. They don't have to plow through the snow. White-tailed deer here struggle. We have heavy snow. They have to waste all that energy plowing through, looking for food that's not available. But the moose have the advantage of having the long legs. But if they break Allen's rule, they have to compensate for that somehow. And the way the moose compensate for that is the same way that our birds compensate for their long legs, even if they're only a couple of inches or an inch in extreme. They don't have feathers on them. Most of our birds around here, so they have a different structure with their blood vessels. Have we talked about this before?
I think so. Don't they wrap it?
They
around?
wrap around
Right.
the venous blood wraps around with the arterial blood. They don't exchange the blood, but the vessels wrap around each other. Our veins are closer to the surface. You can say it's where they take your blood,
Yeah.
and our arteries are closer to the bone.
So
but
they
not-
parallel each other.
They parallel each other, and it's called the rete mirabile. This web. It's a heat exchanger, just like some people have in their. I have a heat exchanger in my house, where people have heat exchangers with their engines and so forth. So it's a way that the warmer core body blood going to the extremities, to the toes, loses its heat to the venous blood coming back, so they can hold on to the core temperature, run their feet at a little colder temperature. And what's fascinating about this is they know that the flow of blood is controlled by a shunt, and the shunt is a striated muscle. Not
Wait a
a
minute, what's a shunt?
it's a way they can open and close and control the amount of flow.
Huh.
So think about this. We know that that's a striated muscle compared to a smooth muscle. Smooth muscles, our heart, our digestive system, not consciously controlled. But the striated muscle is the moose consciously can give their feet an extra shot of warm blood when they feel it's necessary. I just find that stuff, that intelligence that's programmed in, however you want to, we
Right.
lose the vocabulary for it.
Right.
It makes so much sense. And birds have the same design.
Right, because you always wonder how can they be sitting on a branch with their little legs
Yeah.
there not
Yeah.
freeze. But
They've got temperature of much hotter than us, 112 degrees. But they need the fuel for that.
Right.
That's why you mentioned your bird feeders. That's why the birds are coming in. They're burning that K1,
Yeah.
just as fast as they can on these recent days that we've had.
Yeah, it's been a regular winter. Now,
Yeah.
but the moose knees go backwards. I mean, they're not the
They
same
have
as our knees and
They
deer
have
knees.
specially, and birds do too. They have specially articulated joints, so they can pull their legs up and move them forward, so that they're not post holing like we do if we're walking, through deep snow. It's awkward. You put your leg in at one angle, shift your hips forward, and then you're pulling against that hole you just made. It's exhausting,
Right.
and the moose compensate for that.
With their knees, but their knees literally break that way instead of this way.
Right.
And that's
Right.
for that reason.
Right.
To get through the snow
Right.
easier.
I believe so.
Yeah.
You have to always catch yourself, and I try to remind myself, we look at what looks obvious, we tie into that. And there might be many reasons.
Yeah.
Might be many reasons for
Rob?
for that.
Is that a
So this is one of our several
Downy?
woodpeckers. This is the hairy.
hairy, bigger?
Bigger. Bigger bill. You can see the eye is kind of located halfway between the tip of the bill and the back of the head. We also have downy, as you mentioned.
Which is just it kind of looks like a smaller version.
It's the same type of plumage setup,
Yeah.
but much smaller. Downies are slightly bigger than a chickadee.
Yeah.
Don't think of it that way, but they are. And this is a much larger bird. But woodpeckers can survive here. They're permanent residents. There's not a whole lot of migration with this bird. Pileated woodpeckers that you can see make these holes in pursuit of carpenter ants, and so they can do quite well through the winter. It's all about the food.
How come a pileated? I mean, I have, on any big stand of hardwoods these days, they're pileated. And where I am, that's what I have more than softwood. So there's a lot of hardwood. I mean, a lot of pileated in the summer.
Yeah.
I see them or hear them regularly because
Yeah.
they screech. Right?
Yeah,
They got that screech.
They have
But-
Woody the Woodpecker was modeled after that, and that that laugh
Yeah.
that you hear in the cartoon is reminiscent of the.
But I don't see them in the winter. I mean, they don't come with the bird feeder. I mean, is it?
Right, because there's a lot of natural food. I think the bird feeders, for the most part, the suet is a complement of insects that they would be eating. That's the same type of a protein that they get. So, and they've got other things to do other than visit, Conway Lake during the breeding season.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things. There's a period in May where our crows disappear. They just disappear. They're breeding. They're staying low. They're staying out of sight. They're protecting their nest, and there's more wild food available. That's the issue with the winter. It's the food, and some populations, as we talked about, will split up the population. The entire population will migrate, and some are designed, if they've got food here, that they can stay through, and just try to survive.
I think I mentioned this in another conversation that I had read somewhere that bird feeders, obviously they help, but they really only help in the worst conditions, like if it's a huge snowstorm or very cold. Do you have any, about how much bird feeders?
There was a friend of mine who wrote an article for Maine Audubon for their magazine years ago about how it really wasn't good to feed birds.
That it wasn't.
It was not. I mean, the birds. You're creating an artificial population some birds that might stick around for the winter that normally maybe had lost their migratory map. And those are the birds that are back sooner, and those are the genes that get the best nesting sites, and you might be promoting inferior genes. You know, he immediately took the article down. He got so many people called because they didn't want to hear that. And I think for the most part, we feed the birds for our own entertainment and our own education. I mean, I learn a lot from watching the behavior of these birds, variety of species. By watching them, you can see that they're chickadees. There are dominant chickadees in the flock, and if you can pick out, I had one that had a weird tail feather, so I knew that individual. I used to ban birds. I don't ban them anymore, but I used to be able to tell which was which. So we can learn a lot from that.
But what about the bird feeders? I mean, what do you think?
So I think that when there's natural food, they're more apt to take that. You probably notice after a snowstorm, after our first snowstorm, the birds are coming into the feeders more because they've been able to feed without the snow on the ground. There's a lot. There are insects, grubs underneath the leaves, and birds can find that without the feeders, and they seem to have a preference for non-feeders. But I really think that I don't think it's detrimental, obviously, to the population as a whole. I mean, I've got lots of birds coming into my feeders now. Some people say that you've got birds coming into an artificial source and it's a way to spread disease. And that might be more applicable to platform feeders, where there actually is some contact, right. Whereas perch feeders, they're not in that. I don't know. I love feeding the birds. I feed them year round. I have my trees electrified with electric fence, so the bears, although they seem to get around it sometimes, and I get a lot of information from that.
Is the chickadee population stable? It does seem, and people anecdotally talk about this over the years, that some years, I know a couple of years ago, I didn't have chickadees till the very end of the year.
Really?
And and I've heard, sharing that story, people say, oh yeah, not a lot of chickadees this year. I mean, because that's a local, I mean, they're
a permanent resident.
Right.
Yep. Now, one thing that's really good, Tin Mountain has a Christmas bird count. It's a winter bird census. I started it, 36 years ago, and it's always the chickadees are the most numerous birds that we see. And it's not totally scientific. I mean, those are the birds that people are getting at their bird feeders, and there are other birds. There are brown creepers that don't come into the feeders much, so they don't get counted as much. Right. But that population
nuthatches too.
Nuthatches too. So the bird census, you can look back and you can see there's some years that drop off. There are some years that increase. The weather of that particular day can have an influence. The people that are counting might have an influence. So it's hard to tell.
Do they adjust their number of young they produce by what the environment is? Like, I always understood that coyote, and whatever the scientific name is, coyotes will adjust their litter size by the population of the coyote population.
Right. And that might be based on food. If there's more food available, they can raise more. They can raise more young. Raptors have a built-in strategy for the population. It's based on food. They have asynchronous hatching. So a female raptor will start brooding the first egg after she's laid it, and then yolk up another one over the next day or another day or two. So there's always one that hatches out first that gets the lion's share of the food, that is going to be healthier, bigger, and if there's enough food, they get all 3 or 4 out. If there's not enough food, they're at least getting 1 or 2 out. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
The design, whereas the chickadees all hatch out together. And then they,
So we have about 5 minutes left. I know we have some more photos, Rob, so why don't let's take a look and see.
It's a great mammal to to look at with the beavers that we have in here, and And this is sign of a very common bird that we have in our forest around here, ruffed grouse.
Yeah.
Really cold nights, ruffed grouse will often roost in trees, but on really cold nights, they somehow make an assessment and they will dive into a snowbank and overnight. And it's risky. You've got coyotes and fox out there looking for snacks, but this one has broken out, defecated a couple of times, and then taken wing. And of course our moose, large mammals that they don't hibernate like our bears do. They're out moving around. Moose means browser in some Native American term, and that's how they get by eating a lot of balsam. A lot of balsam is enough to get them by. Ruffed grouse, they'll have little appendages that grow on their feet for the winter, snowshoes, that make their feet wider so they can walk on the surface of the snow. Yeah, it's really wonderful to look at some of the things that become more obvious as we get into the extreme of weather, like that. Here's another ruffed grouse where the thing broke out and then flapped its wings a couple of times. You can see wing markings up at the top, then walked out.
Ruffed grouse are protective of their. When I walk on my road, because I live on Stritch Road, in the certain times of the year, one year I was attacked by a ruffed grouse.
Oh, really?
And it attacked my car.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it ran on the side of my window.
Wow.
It was because it must have had a
Wow,
nest.
must have had a nest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting when you get a firsthand experience of something like that.
Having a grouse fly at you, But anyway.
Yeah. And this is a beech. Obviously, we have 2 trees that hold their leaves, 2 or 3 that hold their leaves through the winter. American beech and all of our oaks will hold on to the leaves. It's marcescent. It's a botanist term.
And they hold on why?
Well, it's probably because they're might be of more southern origin and have not evolved to the point of dropping those, and that might protect that from some desiccation, having that on there. Native Americans had a story of the trees held onto the leaves to protect a young brave that was sentenced to death, that needed to be put to death for hunting in a forbidden area, put to death when all the trees dropped their leaves.
Wow.
But an Indian maiden persuaded the forest to please hold on to your leaves until the new leaves start to come out. So that saved his life. I mentioned that in the book that that you read, that we have. Our second printing is just out.
Yeah. So and we'll get to that. What's this? We got 3 minutes left, Chris.
Birch. We've all seen them. They grow out in the open like this.
Yeah.
Great design. That white bark, that's a northern trait. It keeps them alive. The strategy for all of our trees is to stay cold. You warm up too much, you lose too much moisture, the cells desiccate, you get winter freeze. The birch reflect the heat of the sun, bounces off the snow, hits them directly. They can stay colder out in the open. It's a great advantage.
And this is part of that too, and I think you've mentioned it before, but the birch is very smooth bark.
Yeah.
But like big oaks, it's all rumpled.
Right.
And that, to me, I always understood that was like a radiator.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense, doesn't it?
All right, so we got, do we have any more photos, Rob?
Yeah, we've got some tracks here over snow. Snow, we haven't had much snow at all, and that's so important to many of our small mammals that live in what's called the subnivean zone. It's this wonderful zone below the snow, above the ground, which is relatively protected from predators somewhat, and the temperature fluctuates there because of the freezing and the thawing. The earth is relatively warm.
58, right?
And we have this blanket on top, and so when something freezes, when that moisture refreezes, that's actually releasing some heat. Minimal, but it's releasing some heat. And there are some organisms that take advantage of that. Yeah.
Good. Do we have any more, Rob? Okay. So we've got, we're basically out of time. So, You're in the second printing of your book.
Yeah.
Which is, and we reviewed it last year. I think when it came out.
You
which
did a
is-
great
which was great.
interview on
And the name
on
of it?
that. The Science of Watching and the Art of Seeing and the Power of Nature Absorption.
Yeah.
And we talk about a lot of the things
Yeah.
that we talked about just today.
Yeah, it's a very
here.
philosophical approach to wildlife. The way I would
Yeah, it's been
characterize
well received.
it.
Yeah.
Good.
Been,
Well,
been pleased
and you have
with-
second printing.
Yep, and it's available at White Birch, available on Amazon, and so yeah, we're still excited about it. So it's worked out well.
Good. All right, Chris. As always.
Oh
good to
yeah,
see
great,
you.
Mark. Yeah,
Okay, we'll
thanks
see you
so
in the-
much.
See you in the spring.
Yeah, sounds good.
all right.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Thanks.